Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to take a look at the changing face of education in Africa.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Specifically, we'll be looking at a blog post called The Impact of Remote Learning on African Education.
Right.
It's a really fascinating look at how communities are adapting and kind of taking on the challenge of, bringing education to, these sometimes hard to reach places.
Yeah, and what's really, I think, remarkable about this is how quickly the pandemic
Yeah.
kind of forced this shift to remote learning
Yeah.
and really accelerated it across the entire continent.
It's almost like it was already on its way, right? Like we were seeing more and more mobile devices and internet coverage was getting better, but then COVID really just like threw gasoline on the fire.
Completely, like just pushed everything forward so rapidly. And just to give you an idea of the scale,
Yeah.
UNESCO reported that 291 million children in Africa
Wow.
were impacted by school closures during that period. So you can imagine.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom how many people we're talking about and all the families involved. But it's also a story of just unbelievable resourcefulness from teachers who suddenly had to become like these digital pioneers
Right.
practically overnight with often very few resources to help them.
Yeah, and they had to adapt so quickly. And one of the biggest things that became really apparent was that
Right.
digital divide that we always talk about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The gap between those who have access to technology and those who don't. And you can imagine
Literally.
the difference between, say, a student in a city with high-speed internet versus a student in a rural area where connectivity is really, really limited.
It's a huge contrast. It's like
Yeah.
it really brings to light all of the inequities that
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting, actually, I was reading about a program in Kenya
Oh, yeah.
where they're actually creating these mobile learning hubs.
Right.
So they're bringing the internet and devices directly to those rural communities.
Well, that's fantastic.
Isn't that a cool idea?
Love it. Yeah.
And apparently they're reaching over 5,000 students that wouldn't have had this kind of access otherwise.
That's so important because it really highlights
Yeah.
how local communities are kind of stepping up and
Yeah.
taking charge and making sure that the kids are not left behind.
It's really inspiring. And it brings us to a really important point about remote learning. Because it's not just about overcoming these challenges.
Right.
It's also about all the amazing opportunities that it opens up.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So, we often hear about the difficulties, but I'm curious, what are some of those silver linings? What are some of the positive things that have come out of this?
One of the most significant, I think, is accessibility.
Oh, yeah.
Think about students in very remote villages in Tanzania, for example,
Yeah.
who are now able to take online classes taught by professors at top universities like the University of Dar es Salaam.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's an incredible opportunity that just wouldn't have been possible before.
And it really breaks down all those geographic barriers.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
and a blog post actually mentioned this really interesting statistic from the African Development Bank.
Okay.
74% of students said that they value the ability to revisit lectures.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
So it seems like that flexibility of online learning is something that's really valuable.
It really resonates with the way that many African students learn best.
Exactly. Because, traditional classrooms with their kind of fixed schedules and formats don't always work for everyone.
Right.
And online learning lets students learn at their own pace and on their own time.
So it's more about fitting education into their lives
Yeah.
rather than the other way around.
Precisely.
And another benefit that we can't overlook is all those essential digital skills that students are picking up along the way, right?
Absolutely.
It's like they're learning to navigate these online platforms, they're troubleshooting issues,
Yeah.
communicating effectively in a digital world. I mean, these are like
Essential survival skills in today's world.
exactly. The International Labor Organization actually found that digital literacy can boost someone's job prospects by an amazing 230%.
Wow.
So we're not just talking about academic success here.
Right.
We're talking about giving them the tools that they need to thrive in,
Yeah.
this rapidly changing economy.
Absolutely. It's like equipping them with a digital toolbox for the future.
Yeah, but of course we can't just ignore the challenges.
Right.
There are still some serious hurdles to overcome.
For sure.
So let's dive into those next.
You're absolutely right. Even with all this progress, we can't gloss over the really tough realities on the ground.
Yeah.
And one of the most significant is infrastructure.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Unreliable, internet-frequent power outages.
Yeah.
Not enough devices.
Mm.
These are not small problems.
No, it's hard to even imagine like trying to learn online when you're constantly worried about your connection cutting out or your laptop dying.
Yeah. I mean, think about it like a student who has to walk for miles just to find a spot with a slightly better signal so they can try to download some learning materials.
Oh, wow.
Or a classroom full of students, and suddenly the power goes out in the middle of a virtual lesson.
Right in the middle of learning something important.
Yeah, it's happening all the time.
And those statistics we talked about earlier really paint a stark picture. The African Telecommunications Union said over 600 million people in Africa
Wow,
don't have reliable internet access.
that's a massive number.
It's huge, and it means so many people are being left out.
And it's not just about getting students online.
Right.
It's also about making sure they have the skills to actually use technology effectively.
Well, yeah, that digital literacy gap we mentioned.
Exactly. Both students and teachers need training and support to really thrive in this online world.
So what does that kind of training actually look like? Like, what specific skills are we talking about?
It's so much more than just knowing how to turn on a computer or use the internet.
Right.
We're talking about navigating these learning platforms, creating engaging online lessons, troubleshooting technical issues, and even just communicating effectively online.
That's a lot to learn, especially for teachers who may not have had this kind of training before.
Absolutely. It's a big adjustment. But there are some amazing organizations out there doing great work to help bridge this gap.
Oh, that's great.
One example is the Digital Opportunity Trust.
Okay.
They've already trained over 15,000 teachers across Africa in digital teaching practices.
Wow, that's impressive.
They're giving teachers the tools and the confidence to really embrace online learning and make it work for their students.
It's good to hear that there's that support system in place.
Right.
It's not just about throwing them into the deep end.
Exactly.
We've talked a lot about the practical side of things like infrastructure and skills.
Right.
But I also wonder about the social and emotional impact of remote learning.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it must be tough for students to miss out on that in-person interaction.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. We're social creatures.
Right.
That face-to-face interaction with classmates and teachers, that sense of community, it's so important for learning and for well-being in general.
Absolutely. So how do we make sure remote learning doesn't just focus on academics, but also supports that social and emotional development?
I think it starts with a shift in mindset.
Okay.
We need to design these online learning environments in a way that encourages and prioritizes social connection.
Okay, so what would that look like in practice?
Think virtual study groups, online mentorship programs, maybe even virtual extracurricular activities. It's about finding ways to recreate that sense of belonging, even when students are physically apart.
That's a cool idea, like building that sense of community online.
Exactly, and this is where governments and institutions really have a huge role to play.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they have the power to really support these efforts in a meaningful way.
Right. For example, the South African government is planning to invest $1.1 billion in bringing internet access to rural schools.
Wow, that's a serious commitment.
It is. It shows they understand the importance of bridging the digital divide.
And beyond just infrastructure, what else can governments do to really bolster remote learning?
Investing in teacher training is crucial. Give teachers the resources and the skills they need to deliver engaging and effective lessons online.
It all comes back to supporting those teachers, doesn't it?
Absolutely, because they're the ones on the front lines.
They are the backbone.
Exactly.
But I think we also need to highlight all the amazing innovation that's happening in this space.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Despite all the challenges, there's so much creativity and progress happening right now.
I mean, there are incredible organizations and NGOs that are providing low-cost devices and internet access to these remote areas.
Right, like one laptop per child.
Exactly. They've already distributed something like 2 million laptops across Africa.
That's amazing. It's like technology can really be a powerful force for good.
For sure. And it's not just about the hardware either.
Right.
There are all these new learning platforms being developed that are specifically tailored to African educational contexts.
That's so important, making sure the content is relevant and engaging.
Exactly. Students need to see themselves, their cultures, their experiences reflected in the materials they're using.
Right. It has to be meaningful to them.
Absolutely. And I think this is where things start to get really exciting when we talk about the future of remote learning in Africa.
Oh, yeah. Like, what are we looking at down the road?
We're not just talking about a temporary fix anymore.
Right.
We're seeing a fundamental shift in how education is delivered.
So it's becoming more permanent.
And one of the most promising things I've seen is the development of these hybrid learning models.
Hybrid learning. What is that?
It's like taking the best of both worlds.
Okay.
You combine the structure and the social interaction of a traditional classroom with the flexibility and the accessibility of online learning.
So it's like a blend.
Exactly. You can really tailor the learning experience to meet the needs of individual students.
That's so interesting. It's like we're moving beyond this idea that technology and traditional learning are two separate things.
Exactly.
Yeah. And instead we're weaving them together into something that's much more, dynamic and responsive.
Yeah, and this kind of hybrid model could be a real game changer for tackling some of those persistent challenges we've been talking about,
Okay.
like the digital divide, for instance. You can use online resources to supplement the limited in-person instruction that's available in remote areas.
So it's like using technology to bridge that gap.
Right, and make sure that geography doesn't dictate a child's access to quality education.
I like that. And what about that digital literacy gap? Could hybrid learning help with that too?
Absolutely, because by slowly integrating technology into the classroom,
Yeah.
both students and teachers can kind of gradually build those digital skills at a pace that works for them.
So it's more about meeting people where they're at.
Exactly, creating an environment where everyone feels comfortable and supported.
As we kind of wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
it really strikes me that this whole experience has been such an incredible learning opportunity.
Oh, for sure.
The pandemic may have forced our hand in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But it also pushed us to innovate and adapt and figure things out that we probably never would have otherwise.
Right, we had to really think outside the box.
And now we have all these lessons learned, and it's like, how do we take those and use them to build a better future for education in Africa?
Yeah, it's about turning that crisis into something positive.
Exactly. How do we create a system that's more resilient and more equitable and truly empowers learners?
It really requires a collective effort, though, right?
Oh, yeah.
Governments, institutions, educators, communities, everyone needs to work together.
It's a shared responsibility.
Yeah, to make sure that every student has a chance to reach their full potential.
I think that's a great point to end on.
So to kind of sum up this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to leave you with this question.
Okay.
How can we take all this incredible momentum and innovation that we've seen in remote learning and translate it into a brighter future for education in Africa?
Yeah.
A future where every student, no matter where they come from or what their circumstances are, has the opportunity to thrive.
It's a big question, but it's an important one.
It is.
And hopefully it's one that our listeners will continue to think about long after this episode is over.
I hope so.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We talked about the challenges of the digital divide, the incredible resourcefulness of teachers and communities, and all the inspiring innovations that are emerging.
Yeah, it's a really complex issue.
It is, and it's clear that the journey of remote learning in Africa is far from over.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process.
But I think it's a journey filled with hope and potential.
I agree.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Until next time.